Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unveiling the Truth. I'm your host, Mark Howitt, and today's date is January 4th, 2014. Yes, this is the first Unveiling the Truth episode for the year 2014, and I've got a great year planned for everybody with some really great guests. Tonight's guest, he has an incredible story to tell. Can't wait to get him on the air and interview him about his book. We have author Kevin Galalae today, who's author of the book Killing Us Softly, Causes and Consequences of the Global Depopulation Policy. So we're going to be talking about the Global Depopulation Policy today, as well as Kevin's work and his own personal story and experiences. But first, I'd like to give you guys a little forecast of what to expect in 2014 from myself and the show. I've got some great guests. Next week we have Mike Pachesney from the Rundown Live, who's been involved with this stuff for quite a while, interviewed lots of great guests. He's a frontline activist, and he's really involved with a lot of online sites and spreading information and spreading awareness of these issues. So really looking forward to having Mike on the show next week. And we also have coming up Tommy Blackhat from Enemy Within Radio. He's from England, so I'm looking forward to him. We were chatting through Skype last week, I guess. It was just before Christmas, I believe. And he was telling me a bit about his work and what he's been through and stuff. So he's got a lot of exciting things to tell. So I'm looking forward to having him on as a guest, as well as Judith Very Baker, who, for many of you who are not aware of her work, she's the author of this book, Me and Lee, How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald. She was the mistress of Lee Harvey Oswald, and she was involved with a top secret research program trying to weaponize cancer. And she was actually on the front lines of that in the 60s, working directly with the Cancer Society and the government, secret rogue factions of the government, to develop a weaponized cancer strain. So I'm looking very forward to interviewing Judith on the show. We've been speaking for quite some time, and she was actually featured in my last documentary, New World Order, NWO, Domino Effect. And she's a great, wonderful woman, and I look forward to speaking to her about her personal experiences and what she's been through, and especially what she's been up to lately. She's also working on a new book about David Ferrie, so that's going to be very interesting to have her on the show as a guest. As well, this year, in 2014, I do plan on making a couple more documentary films. I'm in the works right now discussing things with one of my previous guests, Ole Damagard, who we can hopefully turn his book into a documentary of sorts. So I've been speaking with him, and we've been discussing things, so hopefully we can get that going, as well as I plan on doing a documentary on the Boston bombing, as well as putting out episodes of the March of Freedom that I was on in this past summer. So I know a lot of people have been looking forward to seeing episodes of the March of Freedom. I want to let everybody know that that's in full tilt. It's being processed now. All the videos that I captured along the way and all the experiences, all the people I met will be in there. It just took a while to get everything organized and to bring up my skills in video production to be able to present it. I wanted to bring up my skills quite a bit, and which is why I really got to thank Mike Pachesney for helping me out with a lot of the video information and educating me a bit more on video editing and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to getting those episodes out for you guys to check out. And what you saw earlier in the broadcast was, I guess you could say, like an advertisement for the show that I put together. So I'm really looking forward to getting the first episode of that out. It was really hard to make the first episode. I think the rest are going to be much easier. In fact, I know they will be. The first one was just really hard because I wanted to tell the story all in one episode, and it's the first one, so it's got to be capturing and interesting as well. So I definitely had to put a lot of work into that one to get it going. But without further ado, I would like to get our guest on the show. And again, our guest today is Kevin Galalae. Now, he's a very unknown author from what I know. He's a Canadian. He actually lives in the same province as I do, in Ontario. And this is his first appearance on a Canadian media source. So I'm very proud to have him on the show today and Unveiling the Truth, for introducing Kevin Galalae to the people that aren't aware of his work, who would like to check out some of the information. And actually, on the Unveiling the Truth website. I'm going to get this up quickly on the screen here for you guys, actually, because I want to show you guys a link that I posted on the page for you guys. You just have to bear with me for a moment here. Here we are. Okay. So I'm just going to go to the Unveiling the Truth website here. And right on the front page, once it pops up, here we go. Right on the front page, you can see that there's the interview for today's interview with Kevin Galalae. I'll also be posting a whole bunch of more episodes in the very near future. So keep looking out for that. But on this page here, when you click on it, right here is a link. Download the book, Killing Us Softly. So Kevin is offering this book free for people to download. You can check it out on this website. I know there's other sources for the book. It's a PDF file. But for anybody who wants to read this book, I strongly encourage you to visit this link here and download the book, because it's free of charge. You could read it on your laptop, your iPad, whatever you're using to read digitally, and get the information. Because I think what Kevin is going to tell us tonight is going to really open up people's eyes to something that's been going on for quite some time, plans and an agenda that I'm sure some of you are aware of. It's on the Georgia Guidestones, the very first one, right on the Georgia Guidestones, depopulation. Also in the food supply, what they've been putting in there, the sterilization, the vaccinations, all this stuff is all part of the plan for the Global Depopulation Policy. So without further ado, I'm going to get Kevin on the line here. And here we are. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Very good. And yourself?
I'm well, thank you. It's a pleasure being on your show, Mark.
It's a pleasure having you on, for sure.
Thank you.
Your story is fascinating, I have to say, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it and getting the viewers out there a chance to see you and hear your words today.
Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity that you are providing me with, because this is a message that needs to be communicated to the Canadian public. The message that we face an existential threat. And my work is, of course, heavily censored for reasons that will become obvious as we discuss this here tonight. And you are the first Canadian media personality to, with the courage and integrity to let me speak publicly about the most classified aspect of the international order, which is the Global Depopulation Policy.
Yes, I'm aware of some of it. I'm sure you've definitely done extensive research on this, which is why I'm very looking forward to hearing what you have released. I haven't had a chance to read your whole book yet, but I did skim through it, and there's a lot of good information in there for people. They really need to know. You are absolutely right. They really need to know what you've presented, and I just showed the link for people to download your book, the PDF file, because I think that's important that people get their hands on this information, because the story you're about to tell, I think, is going to really hit home to a lot of people, I think.
It will rock the very foundation of people's vision of the world or impression of the world. It will shatter the illusion that we live in free and democratic societies, but at the same time, it will empower people to understand the world around us, because it has become somewhat of a puzzle, the policies that our governments and the international community are engaging in. Mm-hmm. People are very puzzled about what is going on and cannot explain what is happening. This will put everything in perspective. So to get it all started, what is the Global Depopulation Policy? The viewers would ask themselves, and it's very simple. It's since the end of the Second World War in 1945, international peace and stability have been maintained by controlling population growth. And how have they done this? Well, they have done it by covertly limiting births in developed and underdeveloped countries alike, and by accelerating or promoting death in a few critically poor areas, such as Africa and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And births have been prevented by interfering with the reproductive system so as to lower human fertility. And deaths have been promoted by weakening the immune system so as to increase morbidity and mortality. In other words, illness and death. And of course, this will come as a body blow of major proportions to everybody who's listening here tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know for a fact that they are doing sterilization techniques through vaccinations as well as food, administering certain elements into the foods and stuff, which causes sterility. And I'm sure that that's all part of the global depopulation policy. Now, you say that this began shortly after World War II. Can you source its root when you've been able to trace this plan back?
Yes, this began as an ideal. The ideal and the intention being to maintain international peace and stability, so as to avoid another war. After two world wars, the international community had decided that by all means a third one should be avoided. Why? Because now there were two countries in the world, the the United States, and of course, a few years later, the Soviet Union, that had developed nuclear weapons. And another war between nuclear armed powers would have inevitably led to the assured mutual annihilation of both protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
So
mutually assured destruction, it's called, right? MAD.
Mutually assured destruction, exactly. So if the international community could no longer resort to war to settle their scores, or internal pressures for resources or for political reasons, then an alternative to war had to be found. And the alternative to war was, of course, controlling population growth, which is a far more elegant and civilized method of keeping the peace and sharing the global resources. And this idea, of course, this ideal rather, can be traced back to Franklin D. Roosevelt. And of course, he's the man who was the moving force behind the formation of the United Nations organization.
Mm-hmm.
And his cherished ideals are embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And prior to that, in the Atlantic Charter, which was drafted in 1941 by the Allies. And their stated policy objectives were to abandon the use of force and any ambitions for territorial aggrandizement, to cooperate globally to secure better economic and social conditions for all, and of course to ensure freedom from fear and want, and to enable the free trade and free access to raw materials to every nation on earth. So it started as an ideal, and it was soon realized that in order to avoid a war, the only alternative is to control population. So it is it was a benevolent intention from the very beginning, but it has grown into what can only be described as a malevolent a policy with many terrible aspects.
Absolutely. And do you believe that the United Nations is the culprit behind this global depopulation policy?
No, the United Nations basically inherited the methodology that was first used by the military apparatus at the end of the Second World War. When the Allies were victorious at the end of the war, they imposed a regime, if you want, of disarmament on the losing countries, which is the Axis powers. The three most important ones being Japan, Germany, and Italy. Part of this program was population control, and the Allies had the opportunity to test the only method that was known to work at the time, and which is the first and the oldest method of population control, but by no means any longer the only one. Now we are surrounded by different methods. We are bombarded from every direction. But the very first method was, of course, fluoridation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was tried and tested on the Axis powers.
Mm-hmm. So when you started learning about this, I guess how did you get involved in learning about this and putting together your book and presenting this information? Like, was it something that interested you, or were you studying something prior to this, or?
No, the manner in which I came to this is truly stranger than fiction, and it started in a very innocent way. I was studying political philosophy, just a summer course at Oxford University in 2009. That was in preparation for a master's program in international relations and global order at Leicester University, also a British university, which I began a few months later. And during my Oxford experience, I realized that the academic environment was heavily censored, and I couldn't understand why. So one thing led to another, and I discovered that the academic environment in England, and actually throughout Europe, throughout the European Union, was subject to a program of surveillance, a covert program of surveillance and censorship. And I was the first to expose this program. And of course, the government of Canada and of the UK has immediately retaliated. And this is how my odyssey began in 2009. So it has been a 5-year struggle and a process that has led me step by step to discover that the initial program that I discovered, the program of censorship and surveillance in British universities, is merely just one aspect, one tentacle of the greater depopulation policy.
Mm-hmm. So you were you born in England, or are you Canadian born?
No, I'm a Canadian citizen, but a naturalized Canadian citizen. I was born in Romania, and at the age of 14, my parents immigrated to Germany, and at the age of 19, I came to Canada on my own because of the great outdoors.
Ah, yes, you like it here, the
Yes.
wilderness and the beauty aspect of it. I definitely agree with you there. Canada has some beautiful landscapes and imagery here. I mean, it's a good place politically, I think. Where the government is a bit less maniacal, if you will, than the United States government, from what I've been able to uncover for sure. So
Yes.
how long have you been in Canada, you said?
I've been in Canada since 1985, so I've spent the better part of my life here.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never regretted coming to Canada. However, I've watched, with great disappointment, the demise of our human rights and civil liberties in Canada, and I couldn't understand why. And as we will unravel the various aspects of the global depopulation policy, it will become clear to everybody listening why Canada, and in fact the rest of the world, has become a far more oppressive environment than anybody would want it to be. So
Mm-hmm.
the Canada, and of course especially the United States, but throughout the Western world, we see a decline in our rights and liberties, and it has become almost indistinguishable from the environment that I left behind in communist Romania. I say almost indistinguishable because we still have here a very carefully guarded illusion of freedom and a respect for the rule of law, but it is merely an illusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just as it all is, for sure. It is all an illusion. So when we were speaking earlier, you did mention a few things that just I really want to talk about here on the show, about your past and stuff like that. So when you came to Canada, I understand that you had to escape Canada to the United States for a brief period. Can you explain the reasons why? And also, you mentioned about you've been in prison 6 times. Is that associated with why you had to leave Canada as well?
Yes, my six arrests and imprisonments are all, of course, directly related to my work as a human rights activist, you might call it, or rather, due to my revelations of critically important and covert programs of censorship, surveillance, and control, and they're all related, as I said, to the global depopulation policy. Um, the authorities were hoping that I would acquiesce after the first arrest, that I would be intimidated into silence. And the first arrest happened in 2011, in May of 2011, 2 days after I returned from Strasbourg, France, where I engaged in a 30-day hunger strike in front of the European Council in order to shut down this program of surveillance and censorship that I had uncovered in the UK. It was a direct act of retaliation, and the intent was, of course, to scare me into silence. But it didn't work. So because it didn't work, they've arrested me a second time. They've thrown me out of my own home. They have taken my children away. They have taken my property away, my intellectual property. They have confiscated all of my computers, all of my reference works. They've cut me off from my own bank account. They've thrown me penniless into the street. They've imposed recognizance conditions on me that can only be described as draconian. So they've tried absolutely every angle possible by abusing the Criminal Code of Canada to silence me, and it hasn't worked. Of course, they've just forced me to dig in my heels and to work to fight harder and harder for our rights and liberties. So prior to my fifth arrest, I was warned by the government of Canada in no uncertain terms that unless I cease and desist with all of my human rights work and I stop exposing critical programs and policies, I will be arrested again on new charges this time. The charges were not specified. They refused to say why I would be arrested. And my response to that was that our children's rights and liberties are not for sale, and that it is my duty as a father and as a citizen to defend them to the bitter end. And I said to the Kingston authorities to come and get me. So a few days later, they did send a squad to arrest me. Luckily, I was not home. It was in the middle of winter. It was in February of 2012. And my friends informed me by phone that the cops were looking for me. I had only the clothes on my back and, of course, my car. And immediately I jumped in the car. It was around 9 p.m. And I decided that it was time to leave Canada and to continue the fight from abroad, because the environment that was created here for me was just made it impossible to continue. So I drove throughout the night out east to New Brunswick. And I looked for a spot where I could cross clandestinely into the United States. Of course, the cold weather made it very difficult, but I managed to find the ideal spot. And I crossed in the middle of the night by floating over a half-frozen river into the U.S. The first night, actually, I didn't succeed. It happened to be extremely cold, minus 24 degrees Celsius, and the river had partially frozen. And the ice tipped my flotation device. I only had a floating inflatable bed that I could get my hands on at Canadian Tire. There were no cheap boats available or kayaks to purchase, and I didn't have the money anyway. So I tried my luck on this inflatable bed, and because of the cold weather, I didn't succeed. I fell into the river that night, and I nearly lost my life. I barely made it out of there alive. Mm-hmm. But I tried again the second night. It was only -5 the second night, so the conditions were much better. and I succeeded. Luckily, I have family in Florida, and I kept under the radar. I used Greyhound buses and made my way to Florida. I kept a low profile for the next 3 months. In the meantime, I made applications to all international courts where I sued Canada at the European Court of Human Rights, at the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, and at the United Nations Human Rights Council. And I handed in my applications. That was around March, April of 2012. And at the same time, I applied for political asylum to 5 different countries. The countries being Switzerland, Norway, Venezuela, Costa Rica, Argentina, and Bolivia. Lo and behold, 2 of the countries rejected my application, but at least they went through the process, and that was Costa Rica and Switzerland. Norway shut down my application without any explanations in the middle of it, and the other 3 countries completely ignored my applications. They didn't even respond. Of course, the reason being that there's no escape from the Global Depopulation Policy, by which time I had already begun my work. Every country in the world is involved in one way or another. The only difference being what methods they're using, whether they're imposed or self-imposed, and whether or not they've been using population control methods for 2 decades, 3 decades, or 6 decades. The oldest members of the United Nations, which are the former Allied powers, began basically right after the war with population control. Other countries were inducted into the system much later. But in the meantime, today, there is hardly, well, actually there isn't a single country on earth that does not employ some population control methodologies.
Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty incredible story that you floated from Canada to the United States to escape the country and be free, essentially, so you wouldn't be incarcerated. They didn't give you any explanation why they were seeking to incarcerate you or anything like that?
Yeah, they said, straight to my face that unless I stop with all my human rights work and publishing all of these revealing articles and about the population, about the covert methods of. At that time, I was only talking about censorship and surveillance. I was not aware that there was such a thing as a depopulation program, and that the censorship and surveillance was somehow related to something as odious as a population control program.
Mm-hmm. So have you published anything prior to Killing Us Softly?
Yes, I did. I published my first book on the subject. I wrote feverishly in the United States while I was in Florida in exile. And it is called Water, Salt, Milk, Killing Our Unborn Children. In the meantime, I have republished that book under a different title, namely Chemical and Biological Depopulation. The book Water, Salt, Milk, Killing Our Unborn Children focuses primarily on the function of fluoride within population control, the population control program. I do mention other methods as well, but only in a very brief manner. And I do mention GMOs as well, genetically modified organisms. But my focus at that time was definitely fluoride. In the meantime, my knowledge of the depopulation program has grown considerably. And with this last book, Killing Us Softly, Causes and Consequences of the Global Depopulation Program, I was able to put it in historical perspective and describe all of its methodology, whether it is direct or indirect, chemical, biological, bacteriological, psychosocial, and economic methods, because they all apply in one way or another. It is a very complex program. It has grown over the past 68 years. And of course, the methods used by each and every country depend very much on the level of development and on the available infrastructure of every country, just as much as they depend on the political will or lack thereof. Because obviously, any kind of population control methods will be introduced and applied without the knowledge and consent of the populace, and this is the case everywhere in the world without exception, for obvious reasons. Nobody in their right mind will accept low-intensity chronic poisoning in their food and water supply, regardless of how important the demographic and the geopolitical targets or intentions are. People simply will not consent to having their food and beverages poisoned for any reason whatsoever. So this has proceeded entirely behind people's backs, and by bypassing the democratic process and the rule of law, as a result of which we have such a demise in our rights and liberties. And the most recent uproar that we've seen over the surveillance society that has developed after the 9/11 incident are merely an aspect of the global depopulation policy. And why? Because the global depopulation policy has moved into phase 2. And perhaps this is a good time to describe what phase 1 entails.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, of course,
if you could explain the contents of your book a bit for anybody out there who hasn't read it, as well as the phases, that'd be excellent for sure.
Yes. So phase 1, which ended in 2000, was to reduce the total fertility rate of every country to below replacement level. That is to say, every woman should not have more than 2 children, or every couple, for that matter, should not have more than 2 children. Why? If every couple has only 2 children or less, then the population is stable. That is, it neither grows nor decreases. So that was the target, to lower the fertility of every country to either at the replacement level, that is 2 children, or below a replacement level, in order to stabilize population growth. And that goal was more or less achieved, with a few exceptions in Africa, a couple of countries in Latin America, a few countries in Southeast Asia, and so on. But by and large, every country on Earth now has reached replacement level fertility, or, of course, below replacement level fertility, as is the case in many European countries that have seen their populations decrease over the past 10 years. And now we are in phase 2 of the global depopulation policy, which started in the year 2000. And the objective of phase 2 is to ensure that the population does not exceed 9 billion either by 2040 or 2050. So the population has to peak by 2040 or 2050 at 9 billion and no more. Why? Because this is believed to be the absolute maximum that we can population that we can support with the available land and technology today. Even today, at 7 billion, so we're still 2 billion short of the peak. A good 2 billion of us are either malnourished or simply starving. So the next 30 years are going to be critical, because we're going to test our food reserves to the maximum, and it will require some very generous sharing and cooperation in order to prevent a total collapse of society. Now, once we reach the goal of peaking at 9 billion and then starting to decrease, we entered the third phase of the global depopulation policy. And the intent of the third phase is to ensure a nice steady decline from 9 billion down to, I suspect that the ultimate ideal level will be 2 or 3 billion. However, that it's not predetermined. It is going to be determined simply by the circumstances. That is, by the availability of critical resources such as water and oil, as well as by our technology, and by the standard of living that we want to reach. and of course by how homogeneous this standard of living is. That is to say, is every citizen on the globe going to have the same standard of living as the as North Americans, which for the time being have the highest standard of living, or are we going to accept a lower standard such as Europe standard today, which is as a per capita basis, Europeans consume 3 times less resources than North Americans, or are we going to make do with a Japanese standard of living? And the Japanese, of course, consume some 6 to 10 times fewer resources than North Americans. So that all depends on future decisions, but the trend is going to be downward. After we peak at 9 billion, we will definitely enter a shrinking phase, and that will probably last for about 100 years, so a century. These
So
are the targets.
I'm sure you're aware of the Georgia Guidestones with
Yes.
the inscriptions on there. Do you feel that this global depopulation policy is going in accordance with that, with the inscriptions on there?
No, the inscriptions on those stones are merely an ideal. They are just stating what would be an ideal global population, 500 million, and that, of course, is unreachable at this time. It's just a pipe dream, if you want. What we're struggling with now is surviving this so-called demographic transition. Whether we can agree on a target that of what the global population should be, that remains to be seen, but we're far removed from that. As a matter of fact, we cannot even agree on imposing, or rather legislating, population control methods openly. Which is why the depopulation policy has proceeded covertly. And
how did you find the information and the numbers for your books on how their projections and the years and all that stuff?
It has taken a tremendous amount of research, needless to say, and I have looked at the database of many organizations, the United Nations, the World Bank, various statistical agencies in North America and Europe. But of course, the most important aspect is the historical context. And as well as demographic data. The demographic data cannot be fudged. That is to say, you cannot manipulate the numbers. And once you look at the numbers from a historical perspective, the picture becomes very, very clear. And anybody who will read my books for that matter, but my last book, Killing Us Softly, I have written it for as wide an audience as possible. So I have used very simple language. I have refrained from giving too much statistical data. So I've just limited the book to the absolute basics, and I have compressed, this entire history of what is the pivotal element of the international order into 111 pages. Now in the new format that is ready for publishing, it's 146 pages, which is the standard publishing format. And by the way, the book will be published this year by Progressive Press, unless they get shut down by the censorship apparatus.
It must be hard to get this information out, to get it published.
Well, it has taken 6 arrests and the destruction of my life. And of course, I have not seen my children in almost 3 years because the governments of the world and international community still hope that I will acquiesce as long as they keep my children hostage. So they're using my children as leverage in order to hopefully deter me from continuing with informing the public of the existential threat that they face. And I say existential threat because the methods of population control used in the Western world include covert chemical, biological, and bacteriological agents that are causing unimaginable damage to our genetic and intellectual endowment. And we can discuss that later on. But
you say your children are being held hostage. What do you mean by this? Like, did they take them away from you, or what happened there?
Yes, they've used the criminal code of Canada to insinuate that because I have exposed programs and policies that are inconvenient, that I somehow am a conspiracy theorist, and that I am delusional. This is exactly the language they used. They said I am delusional, and therefore I am a threat, a potential threat to my wife and children. And they even forced me into a mental hospital for a so-called assessment prior to my first incarceration. Of course, the doctors, the psychiatrists there, they were not willing to go all the way with the government's wishes. So they've released me, even though they held me for 3 days for a so-called psychiatric assessment, which is standard here in Canada.
Yeah.
And because they would not hold me, because there was absolutely no reason, I was found to be perfectly mentally healthy. The government arrested me. The Kingston police arrested me on false charges. But
Wow.
Ever since, they have, for at least for the first 2 years, they have tried to make the case that I am delusional and that I pose a threat to my wife and children because I am delusional and therefore mentally unstable. Of course, in order to protect myself against these false insinuations, I undergone several independent psychiatric tests, and I've posted the results online at Wikispook's website, which was kind enough to dedicate a page to me. And there are now 5 extant reports, all saying the same thing, namely that I am a perfectly mentally, physically, and emotionally healthy individual. And that the government had absolutely no cause to label me as mentally unstable or as a threat to my wife and children. Nevertheless, they've convinced my wife and her family to cooperate, and they have succeeded because my wife's family looked after their own interests, and they felt threatened by their affiliation and association with me. So they distanced themselves from me in order to protect their own social positions.
Yeah, exactly. Their jobs and their
Yes, and
probably
they've
have
done so
jobs and-
by sacrificing me. Of course, everybody is now sorry because they realized that they could not achieve their objectives, which is to silence me. And I've sued back the Canadian authorities, and I'm now embroiled in several civil lawsuits. And it looks that they've come to their senses, and they're willing to grant me now damages. So actually, on Monday, I'm filing the final trial record in my lawsuit against the Kingston Police. It looks like the Kingston Police will be the entity that is left carrying the bag, even though the order came from much higher up, probably from the federal government, if not from higher up, maybe the United Nations. But that we will never know because nobody's willing to investigate, even though the case is now in the hands of the OIPRD, which is the Ontario Investigative Police Unit. This is a special police force that investigates other police forces across the country. And of course, this is a very, very hot potato. There's everything that has been done in my prosecution has been completely against the law. For instance, they have falsified my medical record without the doctor's signature to put out a false medical discharge 2 months after I was released from that 70-hour assessment. And this medical discharge, which is not signed by any doctor, says that I've been diagnosed with delusional disorder.
Delusional disorder. What is that?
Yes. And I posted that on the internet as well, alongside the 5 independent reports that say that I'm a perfectly healthy individual.
I've never even heard of that. That must be in the psychotropic drugs in the year 2000. It must be somewhere in there.
Well, they needed to make a case that I'm somehow mentally unfit for 2 reasons. One, to discredit my revelations about the program of surveillance and censorship, and later, of course, about my revelations about the depopulation program. And secondly, in order to continue to have a reason to keep me away from my children. In other words, they're still using that as leverage. And upon my release from my last incarceration, which, by the way, lasted 9 months, they kept me in prison for 9 months in pre-trial detention on completely false charges. And on the day of trial, the first day of trial, they dropped all the charges because all of the charges were unfounded, and they would have never survived the scrutiny of any judge. But they did keep me in prison for 9 months. So we live in a totalitarian system, and which is no better or worse than the communist Romania that I left as a child. This is why it is important that we don't give in. If we give in now, then we have nothing but tyranny to look forward to, and our children will have no life whatsoever. And I'm not just talking about political and civil rights and liberties. I'm talking about the very right to life, because this is what is being threatened by these methods of population control. These methods of population control, because they entail the slow poisoning of our system in order to undermine our fertility. They are cumulative. They do untold damage to our systems, to our bodies, and this damage it gets worse from generation to generation. So if let's say a family has been subjected to these methodology for 3 or 4 generations, then basically every member of that family will be rendered infertile. So now we have the numbers attest to this. In the Western world, in countries such as Italy and Switzerland, which have been most subjected to population control and for the longest, 25%, that's a quarter of the female population, remains childless. In Canada and the United States, is 1 out of 5 women remain childless. And of course, it's not necessarily because they're infertile, even though a great number of them are infertile, but also because they're subject to all kinds of psychosocial and economic concerns that make them delay childbearing, and then eventually they don't have the opportunity anymore.
Yeah,
but
one thing I've noticed here in Canada and in the United States as well is people are having less and less children. As well, it's harder to have kids, because I have 2 children myself, and it wasn't an easy process. I'll tell you that. It took a very long time. I had to stop drinking for a year. I had to stop taking a lot of foods, almost stop eating entirely, and then it happened. And I noticed that that's exactly when it happened, was when I gave up everything pretty much, and I just didn't have anything in my system. So I think you're definitely onto something there, and it is causing less and less people to have kids, whether it be the female or the male partner that's having the problems with fertility. That's definitely one way of how they're getting people. And I know a lot of people out there, a lot of couples that have been together for a very long time and they don't have any children, and as far as I could tell, they're not using protection. So there's something going on there, for sure.
Yes. Well, the numbers are very revealing. You compare the childbearing rates in the Western world with those in non-Western countries. So, as I said, in Switzerland, Italy, and other European countries, a quarter of the female population remains without child. In Canada and the U.S., 20%, that is 1 out of 5 women, remain without child throughout their lifetime. But in India, it's only 1 out of 30 women who remain without child. In China, it's 1 out of 20. In some areas, 1 out of 25 women who remain without child. And basically, throughout the world, in the developing world, where the chemical methods have been introduced more recently, so you don't have 2, 3, or 4 generations of people subjected to this kind of chronic, long-term, low-level poisoning. The fertility is still normal. This, of course, is going to change very quickly over the next decade. Why? Because now the focus of population control has moved from the developed to the developing world. And that is so because the population of the developed world reached replacement level fertility, and now has already reached the 4th stage of the demographic transition. That is to say, the population is stable and has started decreasing, whereas the countries in the developing world, they're only in stage 2 of the demographic transition. That is to say, they've just began to narrow the pyramid, to narrow the number of people born through fertility control methods. So they are a lot further behind us, and that is why 90% of the population growth over the last 60 years has been registered in the developed world, in the developing world.
Mm-hmm.
The developed world, the job is accomplished. You take Europe as a whole, the European Union, and since 1950, when chemical population control methods began, the population has only increased by a mere 19% because it has been interfered with.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, compare that to, let's say, Africa or South America, where the population has tripled or quadrupled. So you have a 300% or 400% increase in countries where that have been spared chemical control, covert chemical control methods of population.
So these
Whereas
covert chemical methods, they must be spray cans, carcinogens, food, fluoride in the water, just plastics and packaging, product consumption. Are those the sort of things that you're talking about?
yes, of course the oldest one is fluoride. Then we have BPA plastics, that is bisphenol A plastics, and bisphenol A was used to replace glass bottling with plastic bottling.
Yeah.
And the reason they did this is because people lost trust in tap water, and they stopped drinking tap water, and all the yuppies began drinking bottled water. So in order to close that loophole, they created this specific plastic which has the same fertility depressing result as fluoride. So now every time you drink anything, any kind of beverage, whether it's water or soft drinks out of plastic bottles, which are BPA bottles, it is as bad for your reproductive system as drinking fluoridated water.
Mm-hmm. And they're even making baby bottles out of BPA plastics, baby bowls, baby spoons, everything that the babies put in their mouth is BPA. And there's actually an article on the worldpublicunion.org website that I posted not long ago. It was probably about a year ago, and it listed all the plastic numbers to stay away from that had BPA in it. I can't remember them off the top of my head though, but are you aware of those?
Yes, and it's not just not the plastic bottles. As a safe method is you should stay away from everything that is made of plastic.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just plastic bottles. BPA is also used to line metal cans. So every metal can, whether it's canned beans or canned mushrooms or canned tomato soup, is lined with BPA. And it is lined for BPA not because it makes the cans or the product inside last longer, but because they want to surround us with this fertility agents, so that there is no escaping them. So we have fluoride, which is used either in tap water, in salt throughout the Latin America, or in milk in some countries like Thailand. We have BPA plastics, which closes the loophole for people who live who don't drink tap water, or who live in countries where the water is not fluoridated, let's say in the Middle East and so on. We have the most recent one, of course, is the chemtrails, where they're spraying aluminum oxides from the air, and aluminum oxide combines with fluoride and has does double the damage with half the amount of fluoride, and it also has the added effect that it not only does it limit fertility, but it also increases morbidity. And why is this important? I should mention this now. For the last 50 years, or rather the first 30 years of population control in the Western world, the focus was on reducing fertility. But now that we are in stage 3 or 4 of the demographic transition, we have a lopsided or an inverted population pyramid. So in other words, a normal population pyramid looks like this. That is with the oldest people at the top, so very few people who are old, over 65 at the very top, and the youngest ones at the bottom. And of course, this is what a normal population pyramid looks like. The base of this pyramid just widens as the population grows. Once the population becomes interfered with, the base of the pyramid narrows. That is to say, fewer children are being born into the world, and the population starts to stabilize. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that eventually you have an inverted pyramid. So you have very, very many old people at the top, old people who are over 65, and who need to be supported by younger workers, and very few children being born into the world. So now you have an inverted pyramid. So in order for society to sustain the economic a burden of supporting so many old people, and now the necessity is to focus on eliminating the old.
Hmm.
So now they're
Agenda
devising,
21. Agenda
yes,
21.
so
I
now they're
saw.
devising all kinds of methods to make sure that we don't live as long,
Yes, yes.
because of course, three workers to one retiree is an unsustainable economic sacrifice. So this is why throughout the Western world we have now collapsing social systems, and you see that where do these collapsing social systems started first? Of course, in the countries that were first to apply population control methods. So, Japan is the most advanced along the demographic transition, and they have the most old people. That is to say, Japan has now more old people. That is to say, people age 65 and over, than they have young people. Children 18 and younger. So they have 24% of the population in Japan now to 25% actually is 65 and over. And there are simply not enough young workers to support this kind of social burden. And the same now, we have the same situation, almost the same situation in Italy and Germany. Of course, the other Axis powers that were subjected to the same population control methods, the first, and in the most, the most heartless manner, if you want, and not as gradual as in the rest of the world. The burden on these countries now is completely unsustainable. So they're all going bankrupt. And that is why now the focus is on ensuring that the old don't live as long. You cannot have people retiring at age 60 and then living for 40 years in retirement. In other words, being supported by young people who are no longer there. The ratio now between young workers and retirees in many Western countries is 3-1. Compare that to 20 or 30-1 a generation or two ago, and you get the picture. This is why every country now is in the red and it's bankrupt. So now the methodology is on eliminating the old, and it is just as heartless and as cruel as when the focus was on eliminating the young. That is to say, preventing people from being born into the world. And now they are focusing on ensuring that the old don't live as long and they're not a burden on the social systems for too long.
I saw a Agenda 21 commercial by the United Nations, and it was quite shocking. I actually featured it in one of my films, and it has a bunch of older people, senior citizens, saying that they've lived a long, good life, and that's good enough for them. Essentially, they're saying that they should wipe out older people, or when you get to a certain age, that's it. We need to let the young take the world or whatever. And that commercial was quite shocking to see all these actors on there saying, I've lived a good life, now it's time for me to pass on. Essentially promoting the idea that for older people, essentially to give up on life almost. I think that's the gist I got off it.
Well, the bitter reality is that there's only two ways of solving this problem. Simply put, two young workers cannot support a retiree. It's just not possible. It's not economically viable. So the only other alternative is that people work until they drop dead. And of course, the older you are, the less productive you are. But that's not possible. Why? Because we have now chronic unemployment throughout the world. And we have chronic unemployment because technology, digitization, mechanization are so advanced that we produce, more and more goods with fewer and fewer people.
Yeah.
So even though there is a will there on the part of governments to employ everybody, there's simply no jobs available because of our advanced technology.
And the education is the way too. They're teaching all these students, they're spending all this money, but there's no chance that they're going to get a job in their field afterwards.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what you study today, you're facing unemployment. And you see delayed employment as well. So the governments now are trying to keep young people in school for as long as possible. So, most people have a BA or even a master's, and by the next generation, probably most everybody is going to have a PhD before they get to see employment. So they're trying to delay the time when people enter the workforce because there's simply no jobs available. And that is exacerbated by the fact that the population is decreasing. So in a decreasing population, which is the case now in most European countries, the economy is shrinking. And in an environment of a shrinking economic market, there are no jobs available. Actually, the jobs are being lost. And the incentive for those who hold capital, who have capital, is to move their productive facilities to the developing world where the population is still growing. Capitalism cannot survive in a decreasing economy, and that is one of the unintended consequences of the global depopulation policy, which is a paradox. So we're going to see basically the end of capitalism within the next generation, because it is an economic system that is cannot be sustained in an environment of a decreasing population. And I explained that. I explained the economic consequences in my book, Killing Us Softly.
Yeah, it's definitely designed to fail, the economic system. And it is failing.
Well, it's very, very, very. This is a very complex issue, and because it is so complicated, I started writing a series of articles entitled "Survival or Extinction," and they're being published by several outfits. One of them being the Real Agenda, which is a publication that comes out of Brazil. Nobody in Canada or the United States has the courage to publish those articles, where I expose in my first 6 articles that I've already published that deal specifically with economic issues. I expose, the economic machinations and manipulations that were made necessary by this global depopulation policy and the geopolitical circumstances that the world faces today. And I highly recommend that to anybody to read those articles. When I'm finished with them, there will be 18 or 20. By the time I'm done, about 2 months from now, I will put them all together into a book, and I will title it Survival or Extinction. And it explains how the international community is riding a wild horse. Many of the issues we face now, the economic issues we face now, are unintended consequences. That, yes, some of them are the result of particular goals that needed to be reached. Others are simply unintended consequences, and the international community is doing the best to ride this wild horse and to survive this period of transition. You can imagine that the most difficult thing about achieving a population reduction is that you have to destabilize the proper functioning of a society. That is to say, you have to create an environment where it is not only difficult or undesirable to have children, but even impossible to have more than a certain number of children, preferably just 1 or 2. So this is what the economic policies have tried to accomplish, both in the developed and the developing world. Mm-hmm. But they've tried to accomplish this while at the same time trying to homogenize wealth and access to resources throughout the world, which has required that the developed world is being impoverished while the developing world is being enriched. And they're doing this on multiple plans and planes, one of them being that productive facilities and capital is being transferred from the developed world, where the population is already shrinking, to the developing world, where the population is growing. And as this economic conditions or economic policies are in tune with the demographic transition, you accomplish a wealth homogenization, if you want. That is to say, eventually the distribution of wealth is going to be more or less equal throughout the world, and that is necessary. Why? Because in a free market society, everybody has to have access to resources, and the only way to access resources is to purchase them from the international markets. Of course, you cannot purchase resources unless you have the purchasing power, and you cannot have the purchasing power unless you are an industrialized society. So as we are pursuing now global industrialization and global homogenization of wealth, we are also pursuing a demographic transition from a growing to a decreasing population. So all of these things have to be coordinated, and they are being coordinated, and they require some extraordinary thinking and extraordinary actions. And I explain those. Of course, all these actions are being kept secret from us because they require many actions that would meet with our disapproval, especially with the disapproval of people living in wealthy countries.
Absolutely. If people knew what was going on, they wouldn't subscribe to it. They wouldn't agree with it. They would expose it, and that's why they're doing it covertly, is to avoid detection, really.
Yes, but what is important, and I want now to diffuse, this notion that what is happening in the world today is some kind of evil plan. Yes, many of the population control methods are definitely grotesque, but the intent, that is to say, the end result, is not our annihilation. It's not our destruction per se. Rather, it is the is saving mankind from self-destruction and ensuring that future generations inherit a globe, an Earth that is not completely destroyed, and that they still have resources to consume. So this is, the intentions are benevolent, not malevolent, and that is, it's very important to understand that. And because if you understand that, it makes the sacrifices that we're going to face, and we're going to have to make tremendous sacrifices, whether we like it or not, more bearable. And that is probably one of the most important functions of my book, because as I give people these terrible news that their own governments have been poisoning us for the past 65 years, I'm also giving people hope. That is to say, if people realize why this is being done, how few our choices are, and that our governments have and the international community have chosen the lesser evil for the greater good, then people will be able to acquire the knowledge and the will necessary to take control of these goals. Because if we do this of our own accord, that is to say, if we take control of this, we disable the justification for continuing with covert methods. Covert methods can only be done by terrible means that are going to do tremendous damage to us. But if we take control of it, let's say we legislate population control, which should be fairly easy to do in many of the Western world, because would be acceptable to most people to have, let's say,
Yeah, didn't China do that when they limited how many children?
Yes, China has done that since 1978 with the one-child policy, and they were able to do this because they don't live in a democratic society. They live in a one-party state, and this is the crux of the problem. This is a good opportunity for me to explain why the population control, the depopulation policy has gone covert in the Western world. It has been pursued covertly because of structural obstacles that stood in the way that could not be overcome, and paradoxically, these structural problems or obstacles are the very features that make our Western society proud, or that are of value to us, and that's democracy itself, and of course our Christian values. And let me explain. Because of our democratic political process, no politician could go in front of the electorate and say, if you elect me, if you vote for me, if you vote me into office, I'm going to introduce a one-child policy. Can you imagine if between three or four candidates, nobody would have voted for the one politician who would try to explain that unless we do this, we're going to be doomed within a generation or two. So the political process itself, democracy itself, stood in the way of politicians telling people the truth. Secondly, Christianity itself, that is to say, Christians would not accept any kind of interference with our reproductive systems and with family size, because we live by, as Christians, we live by the adage that God has meant for us to be fruitful and multiply. And the Catholic Church specifically has committed itself early on to no contraceptive use and no abortion. And that was that shut down the ability of governments to even discuss um, the possibility of limiting family size and wide use of contraceptives and, let's say, legalizing abortion. So in 1945, when the United Nations came together and it had to find an alternative to war, which was population control, they could not legislate population control because these obstacles, these structural obstacles, stood in the way. And because these structural obstacles stood in the way, they had to proceed covertly. So it was a function of the very strengths of our Western society that have made population control, that have driven population control underground. Let's put it that way. Had the politicians and the international community the ability in 1945 and in the early 1950s to say, to even discuss, these matters openly, we could have conceivably arrived at the conclusion that if we limit, let's say through legislation, our family size to 2 children, it will be okay. Of course, we couldn't do that. China could do this because they live in a one-party state. So when the Chinese government, the Communist Party, says, this is the law of the land, and they did that as soon as Mao Zedong died. Mao himself didn't want to do that. He couldn't. I guess he had moral reservations, and of course he couldn't. He didn't have the statistical data and the foresight to look into the future. Or simply he could not. He did not want to taint, his historical legacy by introducing population control. But the year he died in 1978, and the next fellow took over, it was immediately the one-child policy was immediately introduced. And since then, China has prevented through legislation the birth of 400 million Chinese. That's 400 million Chinese. So the Chinese population now stands at 1.3 billion. Had they not introduced the one-child policy in 1978, the Chinese population now would be at 1.7 billion people. And of course, all of their prosperity and economic progress would have been shot, would have been lost, simply because they would have had to share the few resources they had with more people. And you see, everything comes with a price, including peace. And peace by population control has its own price. It is a lesser price than having to go to war again over resources, which, absent population control, would have inevitably happened. And in my book, towards the middle of it, in Killing Us Softly, I describe what has been averted through the population control policy. And of course, it took some intellectual honesty for me to do that, because it is very difficult to accept that such gross methods, could have any kind of moral justification. And yet, had they not done it, we would all be probably dead by now, either annihilated in a nuclear armed conflict, or we would have been starving in the street, because we would have 2 billion more people today in the world. Not only would we have 2 billion people more, so instead of being at 7 billion, we would be at 9 billion, but we would not even have started the process of the demographic transition, which to accomplish takes 3 to 5 generations. So had we waited until now, it would have been too late. Even if they would have started now all of a sudden to bombard us from every direction with fertility depressing agents, would be impossible to start reducing the population until about 100 years from now. So to achieve demographic objectives, to turn a natural population growth into a decreasing population, is a long-term effort, a long-term objective that has to transcend political systems and has to take part over multiple generations. And this is why it has been divorced from control of the political process at the national level, and this became a prerogative that was put into the hands of the international community, and of course, it is being delegated from the United Nations.
Mm.
And another reason why this had to be an international prerogative and it had to be delegated by a neutral agency like the United Nations is that it had to be done by mutual coercion. That is to say, no country would have willingly adopted, these terrible population control methods unless everybody else would do the same thing. Because it makes no point to reduce your population, just one country, when the rest of the global population is growing. It makes no difference to the earth where the people are, they're still going to consume resources. And we cannot be protected, from pollution and from resource depletion by our borders. Nationality and nations and national protections have absolutely no validity whatsoever in the global environment that we live in now. So this had to be imposed from a central agency. It had to be an international effort, and it had to be done by mutual coercion. And this is why during the bipolar world order that we had during the Cold War, the United States imposed it on Russians, on the Soviets imposed it on the Americans. That is to say, the capitalist bloc imposed it on the communist bloc, and vice versa. So it was a tit for tat effort. And this was, of course, essentially delegated by the United Nations. This is how it has proceeded. So they have saved us from a third world war. They have saved us from a broad and universal famine. They have saved us from conflict throughout the world. And for better or worse, now we're moving, in tandem towards deeper cooperation and integration. So now we are completely interdependent, and there's no other way. It has to be this way because we have nowhere else to grow. We don't have any undiscovered continents that we can send, our excess population as they did in the previous centuries. The Europeans, whenever they had any kind of population problems, they send their people to the new world, to the Americas, to Australia, to New Zealand, and so on. We don't have that luxury now anymore. Now the entire world is overpopulated, and there are no new continents to discover, and sure as hell there are no new planets to go to. So now we can only grow into each other, into one another, and that forces us to share the resources that are available on this earth, regardless where they are found. And that is how globalization came to be. You see, this is the raison d'etre, if you want, for globalization. It did not happen because it was some kind of plan that was put in place, by people with tremendous foresight. It happened because it has been dictated by the physical circumstances of our growing civilization. That's how this came to be, and we're still just riding a wild horse.
Yeah, like I've never been one to really agree with population control methods at all. I believe that we could find different ways to produce materials rather than exploiting resources, as well as a lot of the things that we need is through economics, really. Like, you need money to afford this. We need money to build a well in Africa because they don't have clean drinking water, or this and that. So it seems like money is a restriction in getting other countries' aids and equalizing the planet, if you will. Putting, I guess, making sure that everybody has enough food and water to survive and are healthy, has medicine if they need it, etc., etc. But what you say with the world being overpopulated and stuff like that, being in Canada here, I've traveled all across this country, and most of the country is empty. Yes. I mean, it's only the metropolis zones like Toronto, Hamilton, Calgary, Edmonton, like Vancouver. Those are the main areas where people congregate and live, essentially. But Canada's a big country. There's a lot of open area where people could live and would feel, I guess, less overpopulated. I feel that it's mostly people in bigger cities that are saying that it's overpopulated, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess the numbers are something that you've been studying, I guess.
Well, the reason I chose Canada when I immigrated from Europe was because of the low population density. We are what 2 or 3 people, I think, per square kilometer. We're sitting on 9.2 million square kilometers, and we have one of the lowest population densities in the world, which puts us in a tremendous position of advantage to everybody else. But you see, the central planners at the United Nations don't think in national terms anymore. Countries like Canada, the United States, Argentina, and Australia are the granaries of the world. There's only a handful of countries now, 5 or 6 countries, that produce an excess of grains. And the world depends on us to satisfy the dire need and crisis situations. So whenever the United Nations has to intervene in Africa because there is a famine, or let's say there is a crop failure somewhere else in India or some other country, where do they go to? They go to countries like Canada, Argentina, Russia sometimes when they have a good crop, and the United States. So if it were not for these countries like ours, where we're sitting on so much land, and we have very small population densities, the international community would have absolutely no possibility of dealing with crisis situations. And of course, we have a responsibility to aid the world in this way. Why? Because, well, let's face it, we've taken this land away from the native population. Mm-hmm. So now people the central planners, the globalists, if you want to call them that, or the United Nations people, and even people in our own governments, they don't think in national terms, and they think in global terms. And everything that we consume today comes or is made with the resources, natural resources and human resources that come from all over the place, all over the world. If we were to return to if it even were possible to return to protectionist barriers, to national economies that are completely isolated from the rest of the world, and to rely entirely on our own resources, we could conceivably do this in Canada because we have so much land and we're so resource rich. Mm-hmm. But our standard of living would go down tremendously, and the quality of our goods would go down tremendously, and we wouldn't have peace and stability because everybody else would want to have a piece of our resources. Mm-hmm. And it makes absolutely no sense.
And other countries can't even do that. Other countries don't have the, what would you call it, the irrigation. They don't have the proper landscapes to grow crops, etc. So,
sure, or they're very dry. They're arid. Mm-hmm. They have mostly desert and so on. It makes absolutely no sense to hang on to the notion of nation states in a world that is now so interconnected by necessity. Why? Because the nation state itself is a very new historical entity. It's about 200 years old. Most nation states today are not even 200 years old. They're not even 100 years old, and they have already outlived their usefulness, if you want. They're already dated political entities. And whether we like it or not, we're going to see the dissolution of the nation state. And of course, it has happened already. You look at Europe, the borders have been dissolved. They proceeded there through political integration before economic integration. Whereas here in North America, we have started with economic integration that will eventually lead to political integration. But whether we look at the European model or at the North American model, the trend is the same. That is to say, integration is inevitable. National borders have become more or less obsolete. Most of the important economic, geopolitical, and political decisions are not made in the boardrooms or in the parliaments of nation states. They're made in the boardrooms and hallways of the international organizations, be it the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund and so on.
Absolutely.
And of course, we don't like this. And when we look at this, as Canadian citizens or as American citizens or as German citizens and so on, we focus on the sacrifices that we have to make. But people don't have the global perspective to see what the greater plan is. And of course, we're not being told what the greater plan is because if we had that knowledge, we would know too much. and we may not want to go along with this. So they're afraid. They don't trust us because they've been lying to us now for so long that in order to accomplish a change of methodology, they would have to come out clean and tell us what has happened for the last 68 years. That is to say, they would have to tell us that globalization and the political integration, that economic integration have proceeded in tandem with a global depopulation program. And this global depopulation program has committed, crimes against humanity, but which are very difficult to swallow, very difficult to accept, very difficult to forgive. And yet, at the same time, had they not done that, and would they not proceed to do so, absent an alternative, and I have provided that alternative with my own principles, and we'll talk about that later, perhaps if we have the time, they will have to continue to accomplish these goals, above and beyond our knowledge and consent. That is just the nature of having to push the world towards integration and to break, national boundaries, ethnic boundaries, cultural boundaries, economic boundaries, and so on. Because everybody, and that is true for individuals as it is true for nation states. Nobody wants to leave their comfort zone. They want to hang on to what they know, because any kind of change is painful. And now we're going through the biggest change in human history. We're going from from society ordered along national goals and national institutions towards a society and a civilization that is ordered along international goals and international institutions. And it has never been done before. There is no manual to follow, and it requires a level of cooperation and even coercion that is extremely difficult to accomplish, very laborious, and it takes tremendous effort to reach consensus, because most of this, whether we like to admit it or not, it is done by consensus. But it is done by consensus among the elites, because they're the ones with who have had access to the information and who have been privy to policy-making powers. Mm-hmm. And they left us out of the equation because it would have been that much more difficult. But now we've reached a point where to proceed global integration plan requires the cooperation of the masses. They can no longer use these covert methods because they're doing more damage than good. And I think that the policymakers have come to this realization, and this is why people like me now are allowed to speak. Had I come along 20 years ago, I would be already dead. Why? Because at that time, let's say during the Nixon administration, there was they thought that this can go on forever. They thought they could continue with covert methods forever. They're okay. I mean, the damage to our health is minimal. It's acceptable considering what is being gained. Now the medical evidence is overwhelming. If they continue along these lines, the damage done to our children will be so substantial that greater and greater proportions will be completely dysfunctional, and will not only be unable to be contributing members of society, but there will be tremendous burdens on society. And we see that, of course, increasingly so. And I've had the bad luck to be imprisoned 6 times, and I have spent time with people who from the lower economic branches of society who have been at the receiving end of the most of all of these control methods, and they suffer the most. Yeah. And I've seen the level of dysfunction with my own eyes, and I've been locked up with people for 24 hours a day in a 10 by 10 cell, 3 to a cell, and it breaks your heart. It breaks your heart to see the level of dependence and dysfunction that a large segment of the Western population now has reached, because the damage done to our systems is so extensive. And yes, of course, one could argue that many of these intellectual ability and genetic quality, is a miss and go, and there is tremendous natural variation. But there's absolutely nothing natural about the damage done to a large segment of the population. This is the cumulative effect of covert chemical poisoning that has been gone on now for 3 or 4 generations in some cases.
Absolutely.
And people's lives and health has been completely destroyed, and this cannot continue.
Yeah, they definitely have created a world where people live in hate and fear, competition. They're against each other, and also they're not. It's like you said, the IQ or the intelligence of the average individual is decreasing. A lot of time because they are hiding information from the public. People don't have access to proper education. Also, they're accepting it as reality. They accept what they see on TV, and what all this programming is exactly doing that. It's programming the individual, and then they cause crimes, and then they don't care. They think that life is less important, I guess, and then they end up in jail, in prison. And then it makes it even worse because they're more angry in prison, they're hateful in prison, and it's a downward spiral from there.
Well, and I explained in my book too that especially in the English-speaking world, the judicial system is now geared towards fulfilling a very important function in the global depopulation policy. This is the eugenic agenda, if you want, of this global depopulation policy. Why? Because they're focusing their attention on the lower socioeconomic segment of society, and they are mercilessly going after them. So they're using the law to imprison people from this segment of the population, and to keep them in a never-ending cycle of imprisonment and release by imposing, onerous conditions upon release that cannot be fulfilled, by denying people any kind of help upon release from prison, by making the social services so completely inadequate that people are forced into the drug trade and prostitution and crime. So all of these things are deliberate and intentional, and the judiciary is fulfilling its part in the global depopulation policy, and they're attacking the population from the bottom. And that is completely immoral. But of course, this is how desperate the situation is, and this is how existential the threat is to the very survival of human civilization. That is to say, the scarcity of resources now is so acute, and it is very, very questionable that we will survive the peak. That is to say, that we will survive the next 30 years when the population is supposed to peak at 9 billion and then start decreasing. It will be truly a miracle if we do survive. And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a plan B in place. That is to say, if the planners and the bean counters at the United Nations and other agencies realize that there's just not enough food to prevent mass unrest, and to prevent people spilling over borders and start to invade countries that have, as opposed to countries that don't have, that then the international system will collapse, and they will try to prevent or to preempt such a collapse. And it is conceivable that they have a plan B or C in place, where they would release some kind of virus, just as they have done in the early 1980s and late 1970s, early 1980s with the HIV virus, which is a manufactured virus, and they've done that in Africa, and I explain that in my book why. So it's conceivable that as a plan B, as a desperate plan to preempt a complete and universal civilizational collapse, that they would preempt that with the release of some kind of nasty virus that would cull large segments of the population.
Actually, we just did a New Year's broadcast on New Year's Eve, all the broadcasters on Truth Broadcast, and we were giving our predictions, and most of the broadcasters believed that there'd be some sort of virus coming out, something introduced to the public that was pretty bad. So, are you aware of any plans or anything ahead of time?
No, I don't have privy to any secret government documents, but it stands to reason that the militarists, the military industrial establishment, especially in the United States, they would have prepared for such a thing.
Yeah.
And I think there is a huge struggle now between the moderates, if you want to say, if you want to label them as such, and the extremes, or between um, the secular and the military um, branches, of governments. Um, I think there is a huge struggle as to how to proceed, and I think that people like me and like you now have a tremendously important role because we're providing a different alternative. That is to say, we know that the international community cannot continue with covert methods. We know that we can't simply abandon population control because if we do so, we're all dead within 30 years or less. We know that there's no way we can allow the militarists to unleash, their nasty microbes or viruses as a desperate plan B. So the only logical alternative, the only decent alternative, is to arm people with the knowledge necessary to understand exactly what the bitter reality is, and that we have no options. The options are very limited. There are just three. Either we do nothing, and we all die of hunger, or nuclear annihilation, or two, we allow governments to proceed with covert methods, in which case, 100 years from now, 90% of the population will be annihilated. That is to say, 90% of the genetic lines will be shut down because they won't be able to procreate. And the
Are you
remaining.
aware of anything that specifically targets races, certain races or individuals? Because I definitely heard of that.
When you look at each country individually, you can definitely see in the statistics that every country has had biases. That is to say that racist sentiments have have not been removed, from the depopulation. Has not been possible for the United Nations to impose that kind of fairness, if you want. So I was looking. I'm in my first book, Water, Salt, Milk: Killing Our Unborn Children. I discuss, countries like Uruguay, and in Uruguay, which is a country in South America, of course, the native population has been completely exterminated. There's only 1,000 natives in that country left. There's, I think, population is what, 3 or 4 million, and there's only 1,000 natives left in that country. Now, as you look at the South American countries on the eastern shore, you will see where population control has been implemented more fiercely, and with a more sort of eugenic and racist strain. You'll see that the native population has more or less been eliminated to the point where they represent maybe 10% or less of the general population. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the western seaboard, you see that the native population is still the overwhelming majority. So, how they have proceeded at the national level is very important. Who has had power, political power, is very important. I'm sure that the orders, or rather the targets that have been imposed by the United Nations planners have never had a eugenic aspect to them, or a racist aspect. But once these policies hit the ground and they are implemented, nationally and locally, then you have all kinds of racism and creeping into this, and it just cannot be controlled centrally. The reason it cannot be controlled is because it cannot be openly discussed. That is to say, the United Nations planners, or the people who keep a tab on how countries fulfill their targets, cannot openly criticize them, saying, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, because then they'll have to admit that there is a population control ongoing, and of course they cannot do that. So this is why you have Western nations and in the United Nations, they're in a position where they are forced to deal with any kind of political system any kind of totalitarian regime, any kind of tyrant who happens to be in power, regard they have to completely ignore um, these political considerations because they are constrained by the secrecy aspect of the depopulation policy.
Hmm.
You know, and once this they don't once this becomes public knowledge and population control can be accomplished, with our consent and cooperation, all of these will become obsolete. There will be no need for surveillance. There will be no need for secrecy. There will be no need for police state controls. It can all be brought out into the open. There will be no need to undermine our economic viability, to undermine our social system, to undermine our reproductive systems, and so on. So there's going to be a cascading positive effect that would trickle down into every aspect of our lives once we take control of this as a people, and it is done, from the bottom up rather from the top down.
Yeah,
And I
that
think
was one of my questions actually. Is what can we do to protect ourselves against this? Like, what are your solutions?
what you can do to protect yourself is very minimal. Why? Because the presence of these poisons in our environment now, in our food supply, and in our water supply, is pervasive. You cannot fully protect yourself from. I mean, yes, you can drink. If you drink water, make sure that you put it to a through a three-way reverse osmosis system, or you drink only out of glass. You drink spring water out of glass, never out of plastic. You completely stay away from any kind of soft drinks. You completely stay away from any kind of plastics, any kind of frozen foods, and so on. You buy only fresh vegetables you cook, and you cook them at home, and on and on. But it would cost 3 times more to live like that. You'd have to dedicate 2 to 3 times more time in the selection and preparation of your food. And that implies that you have the economic means to do so and the time to do so. And of course, because we are now in a global system, and Western countries are being impoverished so that the developing world can be enriched. We're all stressed to the very limit financially. That is to say, we're all just 2 paychecks away from the street, from bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So we don't have that kind of luxury anymore. We are the first generation in the Western world to have a lower standard of living than our parents. And of course, this is by design, not by accident. As I said, because there is a need now to homogenize the distribution of wealth and resources across the world.
Mm.
So there's no way to fully protect yourself. I mean, you can minimize the impact of these poisons on your children's bodies, but the only way that we're going to save our children's health, the integrity of their minds, the integrity of their bodies, and of course their rights and liberties, is by educating ourselves, by coming out in full force, by speaking, forcefully, and without fear, by being willing to be imprisoned like I have, in order to force our national governments and the international community to change course. And of course, they will not change course unless we provide them with an alternative. And this is one thing that I believe is probably the most important aspect of my work. I have provided now the international community with an alternative. It is called the Principles. They are published now in 8 languages, available for everybody to read. And now I'm proud to say that the Principles have become the stated policy of the Civil Rights Party of Canada, which is a very small party that was kind enough to invite me in their ranks. I'm now a deputy within the party, and they have adopted my own principles fully without diluting them. And we have just published actually a manifesto of the party. And we state there in clear terms, what the alternative is for Canada and for the international community, because Canada, like any other country, regardless how big and powerful you are, whether you're the United States or China or India, you can no longer think and act in national terms. You have to think and act in global terms. That is just the reality of the day. And there is now an alternative. And now let's see if we succeed in educating the public I know that the Om principles have met with universal approval by people from all over the world, regardless of culture, language, political system, or religion. And I was actually amazed because I expected some backlash, especially from conservative segments of society, but that has not been the case. So, when I wrote the Om principles, the idea was that they would embody the social political ideals um, and dreams of the 99%, that they would be universally acceptable and that they would contain the common denominators of every society and culture on Earth, so that we can all agree on these, basic principles and we would all have the same goals and we can work towards accomplishing those goals together rather than against one another. So
Yeah,
we have to have.
we are actually
Yeah.
running out of time. We only got a few minutes left. So I was just wondering if you could give. I know you said you wrote the OM articles there, or the procedures, like you said. Is there any links that you'd like to give out for anybody to go check out your work, or where they can read this information?
Yes, anybody who Googles my name, Kevin Galalae, can find that information. But of course, I'm going to supply you with the links, and you can post them on your website as well.
Okay.
And people can then access them through you. People who are listening, who are your dedicated listeners. Um, um, I'm in the meantime, I'm fairly well known, and of course, because it is now the stated policy of a Canadian political party. The Canadian media will sooner or later have to speak about that. Of course, the own principles will shake, the establishment structure to the core, but there's just no other way. The world is ready for drastic changes, and the international situation requires drastic changes. And the political system, not only in Canada but across the world, is just simply outdated, and it does not serve the interests of the people. And more people are being left out of the circle of affluence. More and more people are being excluded from society, and that cannot happen. We're playing with fire, and we're going to have social unrest if this continues. So it is time now to change society from the top down, as we proceed to change it from the bottom up. We have to advance, in both directions.
Great closing words for sure. I want to take this moment too to thank you, Kevin, for coming on the show and explaining everybody your work and introducing yourself to the listeners here. And as well, I'll be posting those links for anybody who wants to check out the information afterwards. On the YouTube video, you'll be able to find some links underneath, as well on the unveilingthetruth.com website for this particular broadcast. So I'll make sure to post links there as well. Don't forget to hit up the unveilingthetruth.com website for this broadcast to download the free ebook that he's offered, Killing Us Softly. Definitely anybody who's interested in checking out more information on that and reading the book itself. And I wish you the greatest luck, Kevin, and I do look forward to keeping in contact with you in the future. If you ever need help with anything, let me know, and vice versa. If I got any questions, I'll definitely be in touch with you for sure.
I will. Thank you once again for giving me the opportunity, and I just want to praise you for being the first Canadian media outlet to do so. That takes tremendous courage and integrity, and you deserve all the praise for that. This is not without risks. And talking about this, that we're able to talk about this, actually nothing short of a miracle.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and I hope I'm not the last one too. Keep up your work, and I wish you the best, Kevin.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there we have it, folks. Kevin Galalae. I think that was a pretty great interview. He went into detail about the depopulation policy, gave a lot of information. Definitely, I'm going to have to review this interview because there was a lot of information that was discussed on there, and I definitely want to catch up on some of the work as well as read his book, Killing Us Softly. Again, it's available to download for free on unveilingthetruth.com. You just have to go to the website and check for the broadcast. This is Unveiling the Truth, episode number 13. for the date January 4th, 2014. So anybody who wants to get a free copy of the book, download it. It's not a very long book. Like he said, I think he said the PDF is 114 pages. The published version will be 140 pages. So it's not a very long book. It wouldn't take long to read, which is why I definitely plan on reading it and getting some more information on this. And for everybody out there who's listening, thank you for joining again tonight on Unveiling the Truth for the first broadcast of 2014. I do appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens here on the Truth Broadcast Network and on unveilingthetruth.com. For anybody out there, subscribe to the Unveiling the Truth YouTube channel, as well as my own personal YouTube channel, Mark Howitt, and I'll be posting as much videos as I can for you guys.